Welcome to the new Grad Success Summit. I am here with the Dr. Meredith Castin. She's a physical therapist, but beyond that, she is a non-clinical career expert. She's going to share her story about how to get into a non-clinical career path, even as a new graduate, and how to overcome the stigma of potentially being a therapist in a often realm where therapists cannot get non-clinical jobs. So I'm really excited to learn all about this with Meredith. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I think you have a really interesting story of how you transitioned from your clinical work to non-clinical. So before we dive into basically the top careers that new grads can do that are non-clinical, do you mind just sharing a brief overview of your story?
Sure.
Okay.
So I was a career changer, and I started out originally as a web designer and graphic designer, fresh out of college, and used to get in trouble all the time at my job because I would distract people, and everyone was like, you need to be working with people and up on your feet, because I would always go to other people's desks and kind of distract them. And so I kind of had it in my head that maybe that wouldn't be my long-term career, but it wasn't until I got injured at the company party. We'll leave the story out of it. I got a really stupid injury at the company party, and I ended up going to PT and found that, this was the answer to my prayers, because it felt like a career where you could help people and you could be on your feet and moving around and chatting. And for the first 3 years or so, I'm skipping the whole part of getting there, but for the first 3 years or so of getting out, it did feel that way. But around 3 years in, I started to realize that my back was hurting and my neck was hurting and my brain was hurting and my heart was hurting. And I was having all of these emotional difficulties with the idea of serving patients in a way that was kind of one-on-one, but dictated by productivity and billing and all of those things. So on one hand, I would enjoy these treatments with these sweet little old ladies, and I would love getting them out of bed and helping them walk. But then I would realize that I had terrible units at the end of the day, because I had spent the first 30 minutes of that session just cajoling this poor sweet little old lady to get out of bed because she was crying and scared. And so I was always at odds with the realities of patient care compared to what I enjoyed about it. And I hit this point around 3 years in where I was thinking, I don't know if I can do this long term. And so I had this heart-to-heart moment with my husband, and he said, just put in 5 years. If you put in 5 years, then you can say that you didn't waste your degree. You didn't waste your education. And so I did. I put in my 5 years, but by the time I hit that 5-year period, I was able to land a non-clinical job and then also create a career for myself as a writer and eventually a head of content. And now my current role is the founder of the nonclinicalpt.com. And the reason I started that site is that when I did end up leaving patient care and I was able to land a clinical liaison job, also called rehab liaison, and then also take on this other role, which was at the time called New Grad Physical Therapy, and it's now part of the parent company. But through doing all of that, I had a ton of people reach out to me, and they just wanted to know, how did I do it? Could I help them do it? And I still get emails from that original company getting forwarded to me, because people are still reaching out for help in that respect. So I'm really glad that I started non-clinical PT.
I mean, Meredith, you've started like a whole movement. For those of you who don't know Meredith, she really ignited this path and this movement towards non-clinical careers, which, we often say that phrase, but for any of you who are maybe new, basically what that is another career that doesn't have to do with direct patient care. And so she's going to go over a couple of those, and you may choose these because maybe you're already feeling burnt out, because this summit is for those of you who are new grads, but also even for seasoned professionals, or maybe you've realized that after your schooling that this wasn't quite what you thought it would be, and maybe your passion isn't quite in patient care, but it doesn't mean that your career, that your degree can't be useful. And so Meredith is going to share now how you can use your degree and still help people, but just in a non-clinical way. So I know you have a list of a couple really great options for people who potentially want to do something different. So let's dive in.
Yes, thank you. I just put together a list of the 4 most common ones, because you and I, when we chat, we can go on for hours, and I know how rambly we get. So I'm going to do the 4 most common ones, and I would say the best options for people who want to go in as new grads, because this is a new grad summit. There are plenty of other opportunities, but I'll start with these 4, and then I will delve in a little bit into how do you start planting the seeds as early as possible to land these roles, because that was the part I left out of my story was, oh, I finally landed this job 2 years after I had my come to Jesus moment of, okay, I don't want to be in patient care long term. And then all of a sudden, it sounds like I just landed this job. It took me 2 years of trying. And so that's why I have my website, and that's why I wanted to come on today, is to help you guys. If you're thinking already, you're getting that feeling, maybe you're still sitting in class and you're not even done with school yet. Maybe you're in your clinicals. Maybe you're fresh out of school and you're going, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this long term. Just that feeling of, oh crap, what have I done? Then hopefully some of these tactics will help you really plant those seeds, so that when you do ultimately decide to either go semi-clinical or fully non-clinical, you'll have things set up and it'll be a relatively easy transition, unlike my pain and tears-filled one. So I'll start out with the one that was really the one that got me started, and that one is clinical liaison. And it's also sometimes called rehab liaison. And if you're familiar with inpatient rehab facilities, this role is basically the marketing and sales liaison and the incoming clinician, I guess, or the intake clinician, to fill those facilities, those inpatient rehab facilities, with appropriate patients. So if you work for, say, it's called acute rehab unit, sometimes ARU, inpatient rehab facility, IRF. And so if you are familiar with any of those facilities in town, they always have rehab liaisons working there. Sometimes they have a full team of these people. Sometimes they have 1 or 2. It depends on the facility. It depends on their financial health. It depends on how much they invest in that team. But that is a great role for anyone who's worked in either acute rehab or inpatient rehab. It's not usually ideal for people who have worked in outpatient. SNF is kind of on the border, but the reason it's so good for a role like acute care or inpatient rehab is because, generally speaking, you have seen that type of documentation done. So you're familiar with acute rehab documentation, and as an inpatient rehab liaison, you look at a lot of documentation. And so you'll say, okay, this patient was contact guard assist with ambulation, but look, she was max assist with getting out of bed. So because of that, you then have to look at this documentation and say, okay, is this person appropriate for inpatient rehab? And for that, you need to know the Medicare inpatient rehab criteria. So usually it'll be something like, can they tolerate 3 hours a day, 5 days a week of intensive rehab? And if so, okay, then do they have a need for it, or would they be better off going to home health or outpatient? Or do they have the cognitive abilities to make gains, or are they at the point where they're not really retaining gains? So these all come from reviewing the notes of the clinicians in the acute facility. And then the reason that an inpatient rehab clinician would also do well in this role is that they're used to seeing those notes for incoming patients. And then they also are just familiar with inpatient rehab and what it takes for a patient to really thrive in that type of environment. So I was lucky, because when I hit my 3-year freak out mark, my husband and I had this discussion, and he said, why don't you go PRN? At that point, I was still outpatient. And he said, why don't you go PRN, check out some new settings and see if you enjoy them? And that's how I was able to get my experience in acute care and inpatient rehab. So even if you're a new grad working in sports or ortho or a SNF, never fear. You can always pick up a weekend role, a PRN role, or maybe if you work outpatient for a hospital, you can ask to float into the acute care department. But just get that kind of experience, because that's the type of role that is just really good if you have that kind of background. And the other thing that really helps you in that kind of role is having connections. So if you have worked in acute care, then you're going to want to make friends with as many people in your facility as possible in the case management department. And you want to try to make friends with the liaisons, because if you work in acute care, I guarantee you your facility feeds to at least one rehab facility. So those liaisons will come in, and what you can do is just kind of ask around, ask some of the other clinicians, hey, have you met any rehab liaisons from South Bay Rehab Center? That's where I used to work. Or have you met anybody from Scripps Encinitas? That's another place where I worked. And if they've met people, then ask to be introduced to these people, and then you'll be fresh on their mind. And if you sit down and you have honest, frank conversations with them, one, about how important it is to you that you get these patients into the facilities that they need to be in, and two, that you have some career aspirations of your own of maybe taking on one of these roles, then you'll be in really good shape. So a lot of it's networking. A lot of it is knowing what to highlight on your resume. But I would recommend 100%, if you're interested in a clinical liaison role, at least make sure that you have some inpatient rehab and or acute care experience on your resume, and that you really note the connections you've made. So you can volunteer for interdisciplinary committees. You can volunteer to be like the discharge planning task force liaison. Make up a role for yourself, but step up and really take initiative. And those are the things that'll get you noticed. And
Awesome.
I can move right into other ones.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm a rambler, like I said.
No, you're doing great. And also, if
Sure.
anyone has any questions on this, this is really going to be a bit of an overview. But like Meredith said, there is so much more to know about rehab liaisons, about all these other career routes. So Meredith has amazing resources that we'll share at the end. But also, there's a live panel on August 17th. So make sure to attend that, and you can get some of your pressing questions answered live. Okay.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. The next one I wanted to chat about was the other thing. So while I was working as a rehab liaison, I was doing that PRN, and had someone said, Meredith, you could go full time, I would still be in that role today. None of the rest of my career would have happened, because I really liked it. But that never happened. I was kind of stuck at the PRN level, and I'll be honest, they're really appealing jobs. They pay about what you get as an inpatient rehab or acute care clinician, and they sometimes have bonuses attached. So they're appealing roles because you're still using your license, you're still using your experience, you get paid pretty well, and you still get to even assess patients.
You get to interact with the patient, and it's just a very easy transition.
Yes,
right?
It's a great transition. And so when people get into these roles, they usually don't leave unless they're forced to leave in the event that a facility closes or they're downsizing. So for me, I stayed for about 2 years in that role. And during that time, I was trying to figure out how to fill my time. And so I'm trying to remember. Okay, I think at that point I was just doing that a couple days a week, and then I was writing, and I helped launch a website. I was one of the co-founders of New Grad Physical Therapy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, because it's since become absorbed into the parent company, which is called Covalent Careers. But at the time, I was one of the ones who launched that site, and New Grad Occupational Therapy and New Grad Speech Therapy. And so I got pretty handy at launching websites. But I didn't know what I was doing, except I knew that I could write, and I was pretty decent at it. And everything else I learned on the job from the guys that ran Covalent Careers. And so it was kind of like a crash course in how to create a website, how to build an audience, do things like that. And I've had to learn a ton since then. But at the time, at least, I felt like I had a pretty good formula of, okay, if you're going to build a website, you need to generate interest, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. And so because of that, it got my name out there a good amount, because one of the ways that you build a website is through search engine optimization. And part of search engine optimization is getting backlinks. This is delving into a whole nother topic, but I ended up reaching out to a bunch of companies so I could write guest posts for them, so I would help grow NGPT. And because of that, that helped get me noticed as a content writer. And so that was the other step of my career. And that's the one, for a while, I was juggling these two things. It was either NGPT is going to take off, or I'm going to go full time as a clinical rehab liaison. And it ended up happening that NGPT took off to the extent that at least it kept me so busy. And then they were able to hire me on as head of content for the parent company, Covalent Careers. But during that time, I established myself as a writer, and you can do this as a new grad or a student, because sites like New Grad Physical Therapy, which I believe it's just Covalent Careers now, but they accept guest posts. Places like Student Doctor Network, you can write for them. I think even Debt Free PT, sometimes you guys take guest posts. If they fit the right content, or the right topic, I should say, I take guest posts for the non-clinical PT. My requirements are just making the post actionable and informative, and something to do with non-clinical careers. But I believe in paying it forward. So I love publishing guest posts from people because it helps them build their expertise in their portfolio. And so I think that's a really great way for a new grad to make some sort of side cash. And then if they want, or if you want, you can really build that into a full-time career. And I do have an article that we can link that kind of walks you through the steps of how I went from unpaid at NGPT to unpaid guest writer, all these places, to finally starting to get money for it. And then eventually now I wouldn't say I bilk people, but I make a good rate as a writer, which it takes a long time to get there unless if you follow these steps, you can get there a lot faster. It's a totally free article. It's just very informative, kind of, hey, do this, 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 and this. So if you're interested in getting started, you can link to the article and people can check that one out. So that's a great one, but one caveat with that role is that in order to get a full-time content writer for a health organization, it can take you a while. So that was part of my 2 to 3 year transition of leaving patient care, is I had to figure this all out myself. But yeah, if you follow the steps, you can do it a lot more quickly. And I definitely recommend starting strategically from day one and saying, okay, if you know you want to be a full-time or maybe just a freelancer who gets a lot of work writer, then really be strategic from day one and start getting your materials posted on high visibility sites as a guest writer. You're not going to get paid, but you will get noticed, and then you can start commanding those rates. So that's enough about that one, because it's not really as popular as some of these others, and these other ones are really, really exciting, and I definitely want to make sure we get to them. But clinical trainer is a really exciting one, and it's great for new grads because basically what you do as a clinical trainer is you teach patients and clinicians how to safely use products or services, or I'm just going to leave it at products for simplicity, but it's generally products or rehab technology. So if you've ever worked in a clinic where you use Bioness technology, or you've used the ReWalk robotic exoskeleton, things like that, and you, especially if you feel like an inclination or a passion toward this type of rehab technology, I highly recommend that you step up and start saying, okay, I am going to be kind of I always use the word czar. I don't know if that's the right word because there's a homelessness czar in San Diego, but it's like the task force leader or the czar, but be the ReWalk czar or be the Bioness czar and be the person on your clinical team who knows all of the things you need to know about that type of technology or that product. So this is great for people who work in outpatient. This is great for people who work in inpatient rehab. Not so great for people in acute care because you don't usually use as much tech or as many kind of fancy devices for rehab. But it's a great, fulfilling career. I've got a couple of spotlights on my site of people who have gone that route. I will say there's a lot of travel involved, which can be a benefit or a drawback for people just depending on where you are in your life and your career. But I find as new grads, quite frequently, you are really eager to see the world and see the country before you're, I don't want to say saddled, but before you maybe settle down with a partner or maybe have some kids or some pets. So it's a really cool career for new grads. Another reason is they are attracted to sort of the like vibrance of youth. I see a lot of young people in these roles, people who are fresh out of school or just a couple of years out, because there's something really inspiring and engaging about someone who's on the younger side saying, check out this great technology. I'm going to teach you how to use it. And they're just excited, I should say. And so don't rule out this career path. Some other names for it: clinical trainer, clinical educator. Sometimes it's called clinical specialist. So really exciting career path. And ways to get involved and start sort of building your expertise and getting the experience while you're still on the job are like to step up, get to know the technology. And then other things is when you see people come in, maybe from one of those companies, chat with them, ask them how they got into their role. It's a very network dependent role. And because of the travel requirements, a lot of people interview for these roles thinking that they're so interested, and then they realize how much travel is involved. Sometimes it's like 75% of your week is travel, and they get scared off. So these roles aren't super easy to fill because they're really looking for the right person. So yeah, basically just make sure that you know what's involved, chat with the experts from the companies, make sure that you really develop that expertise with that software or technology or whatever you're kind of hoping to represent. I'm leaving out the side that you can sometimes represent things like WebPT or different types of software. That's like another conversation for another time. But, and then list that on your LinkedIn and your resume, because a lot of times when recruiters are looking for people, they'll go, oh, this person worked with biomass, but if it's not on your resume, if it doesn't say you worked for them, then people aren't always going to know. You're not going to come up in a search query. And someone called Matt Fuller, he's a guy that I interviewed for the website. He works for Rewalk Robotics, and that's how he landed his job, was through a recruiter. And he had worked with the Rewalk robotic unit as a student, and he had it listed on LinkedIn. And so someone saw that, did that search query in LinkedIn, a recruiter saw it, and then the rest is history. And he's had an incredible career where he's grown. He's now, I think, director of business development. So it's a really cool role. And I will say there's a little patient care involved. So if you're leaving patient care because you're like, I don't ever want anything remotely physical ever, 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 be aware that these roles probably have, I don't know, maybe 20% of the time you will be actually teaching the patient to use the device. And so if you have a terrible back and you can never practice again, just keep that in mind, or maybe pursue a company that's more of a software, or maybe not a robotic exoskeleton where you're going to be kind of lifting people. Go for something that makes smaller devices, 10 units or things like that. So.
I love that. I love that insight.
Yeah.
And I love how, you're doing just, I'm going to chime in and just say, I'm listening so great. And this is such great information, and Meredith has so much information to share. And I agree with the clinical educator. It's so important that we do those roles, because sometimes those roles go to other people who aren't in rehab. And I can really tell the difference when I've worked with these clinical educators, and I can tell the difference between them and if I were to do that education. So definitely step up into these roles, and it's totally doable, 100% doable. Yeah.
Yes. And I love that you brought that up, because that is a big challenge, I think, for clinicians in the rehab professions. A lot of these roles by default go to nurses. Everything that I'm listing, including rehab liaison, which sounds crazy, because why would a nurse be reviewing therapy notes, right? But that's what happens. Nursing is a huge industry, and it's very strong in terms of numbers, in terms of how much they lobby. And so we do have, this is kind of an aside, but we do have a catalyst group in the APTA. If you're a member or you're considering joining, I would encourage you to join the Health Policy and Administration section. And then within the Technology Special Interest group, which is in the Health Policy and Administration section. It's very confusing, I get it.
I will link all links below.
All links below. But please join our catalyst group, because that's the number one reason. We just did a poll today in the Facebook group. And the number one thing that people want out of it, myself included, is we want the APTA lobbying on our behalf to get us into these roles. Because like Emma said, we are user focused. We are taught to see and teach people from a user focused lens. We're the ones who look at any task or any functional need of a patient and we say, okay, what do they need to do this? So when it comes to a lot of these roles, that user-focused lens is incredibly valuable. And some of the best liaison teams out there have maybe a single nurse and then 3 rehab clinicians. So we need to be lobbying, we need to be advocating, and that's just a little aside. So thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, you're welcome. No, and I think, we don't, you're new grads, you're people who are fresh out of school, and there's so much you have to offer. And so this masterclass with Meredith is not necessarily to try to get you to go to these other careers, but just for you to learn that you are more, you can be more, you can be creative and you can do different things. So I think you have a 4th career path, right, Meredith?
Yes. I mean, I'm not even touching on things like entrepreneurship. There are probably others on this summit who have plenty to share on that. But the 4th one that I really wanted to mention this one, because I see our future in the non-clinical world being largely in informatics. And I don't know if any of you guys have heard about clinical informatics, but it's a communication-based role. So you're essentially the missing link between the clinical team and the IT team. So anytime you've wanted to bang your head against the computer because your EMR is clunky and not working, yes, clearly not designed by a therapist or with any therapist input. And you've probably also had this happen where, well, if you're a new guy, maybe not. But once you've been out for a few years, you'll notice there will be that person in the department who always gets tapped for all the non-clinical projects. Oh, join this joint committee. Oh, join this team. Do this, do that. And So you don't want that role to go by default to somebody who just gets tapped for everything. You kind of need to speak up for that role. But you're in effect, you're the communication link between the IT department and the clinical department. And you're the one who says, okay, here are the needs we have for our EMR software. Here are the needs we have for any other sort of electronic or informatics system that you use as clinicians. And how do we get this done? So you need to be able to speak IT language and you need to be able to speak clinical language equally well. And there are courses you can take to make that happen. And you can get some on Udemy, you can get some, or Udemy. Sometimes I think it's Udemy, but some people say Udemy. Anyway, I can link some of those guys. But there's some courses you can take that are kind of intro courses where they're really low cost and you don't have to commit a bunch of money. And then if you take those courses and you're like, well, la-di-da, this seems like something that interests me, then you can go on, and there are a lot of extended studies programs through various local universities. So UCSD, where I live, has an informatics program. University of San Diego has a really interesting informatics program that's appropriate for associates level. So if you're a PTA or an OTA and you're interested, you can take that certification. And that's what's really cool about that one. And part of why I wanted to bring it up, because some of these roles, liaison and trainer, typically they're going to want the full bachelor's degree and then a full PT or OT license or SLP license. But with informatics, in many cases, and content writing too, companies are a little more open to having an associate's degree for these roles. So highly recommend pursuing that. I have to throw something out. I don't mean to throw my alma mater under the bus by saying this, but I went to University of St. Augustine and my eyeballs about rolled back in my head when I saw that they had a clinical nurse informatics program. And I was like, what on earth is going on? It's a PT and an OT school. It should be clinical informatics. That's what this is. And again, to get on my soapbox with what Emma pointed out earlier, we are the ones who are the best at doing this. We are the ones who have that user-focused lens. We are so functionally minded. We want to help people use the least amount of energy to get to their end goal. And that is exactly what informatics is. It's taking this clunky, crappy EMR, not to throw any EMRs under the bus, but I'm looking at you, hospital systems. And so you're taking this clunky, crappy EMR and tweaking it so that it actually works for the clinicians instead of how it is now, which is against them. So highly, highly recommend that one. And as a new grad, the reason that you're so poised for this is that you have the technical knowledge. First of all, most of you have probably been on multiple clinicals where you've used multiple systems. And an older clinician, nothing against them, but they might have only used one type of electronic charting in 25 years of care as a therapist. Whereas you, having done 3 or 4 clinicals throughout your education, you might have used Epic and Cerner and a couple of others. You probably used WebPT and Raintree. I mean, there are just so many out there, and all of them want to continually be improving the software. And so the roles vary quite a bit. If you're working for more of an outpatient software company, you're going to have a very different role that might be more almost account management. But if you work for a company like Epic, you might have a role that's like an EHR trainer or something. So it has a little bit of crossover with that clinical trainer role that we discussed. So I know I've thrown a lot out there. That was a ton of stuff, and I want to just peek at my list. And Emma, I'm sure you have plenty of things.
Go for it. No, peek at that list. And for those of you, like I said, Meredith has an amazing website, the nonclinicalpt.com, and so she has really great spotlights with examples of people that are actually doing these career routes, going through these transitions. And so take a look at that, because what we are all about is empowering you to do what you actually love, to live your life, to enjoy what you do. And so if patient care is that, great, 100%. We have lots of other talks in this summit about how to rock patient care and make sure that you love that. But if you're feeling like lost or that's not it, then check out Meredith's resources.
Thank you. Yes. And I agree. You couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it any better, because that is exactly how I feel. I've really strived. I never know which word to use. I'm a writer too, but I've always worked to make sure that people realize, including the APTA, including anyone in our profession, I'm not about stealing people and telling them that the magical solution to career happiness is non-clinical route. It was for me, but I ultimately ended up going the entrepreneurship route. So everyone is a little bit different in their career, and you can do anything you want. And hopefully if you stay in patient care, all these wonderful speakers that Emma has lined up, she's phenomenal. They will help you really make the most of that. And all of the things that I'm sharing with you are more if you decide down the road or now that you want to take these paths. Try to start sowing those seeds early. So the last point with informatics was basically, you can always volunteer. Again, I'm going to use the word czar, but you can always volunteer to be kind of the informatics czar in your department. If there isn't someone already doing that, or even if there is, again, chances are it's someone who's been out of the clinic 25 years and they've just been at the company so long that they kind of by default get a lot of these opportunities that are more, trying to think of the right word, but varied, not clinical in nature. So step up and take some initiative and say, I know I'm a new grad, I know I'm brand new, but I've worked with a lot of EMRs and EHRs, and I'd really like to take on a role in the department where I communicate with the management team, with the clinicians, and with the IT department, and just learn more about that process, because I can see eventually in my career maybe wanting to go more that route. That way you don't scare them about saying, oh, they hired you and now like two months later you're going to go for an informatics role. But it's a way to just say, I have these career goals to really fix technology and make it work for clinicians instead of against us. And if you can frame things the right way, you can really start making some leadways in there, and really start making some pathways for yourself.
Awesome. And speaking of transitions, I know your next point, which I'm so excited to talk about, is how do you sort of skillfully, tactfully transition from patient care to these career routes? Because I know there could be some barriers.
Yes. And that's a really, really good question. It really depends on you, and not to put it back on you, but as a new grad, you might be drowning in loans. You might have had a scholarship or had your school paid for. Everyone's in a very, very different position. So those things that you need to do, you need to look at your considerations of your big financial picture, your big emotional picture, your health picture. And I do recommend that people do a lot of introspection, because it's tempting in some cases, if you have a job that you're not loving, to just say, oh, non-clinical is the answer, and then just jump at the first job out there. And you're nodding, Emma, but again, if you take a job that's 75% travel, you might be like, that's not what I wanted at all. I've got a dog, or I've got 3 cats, so I want to be home with them. So I definitely recommend that you really take some time, explore your strengths, explore your interests, explore your passions. And then if you decide it's time and you want to make the move, then you still have to decide, do you make a full leap? I call it the plunge. Or do you do more of a slow, one of my former associates used to call it the career ombre, which I think is really funny for all the guys out there. It's a hair term where it's like dark to light ombre. But anyway, she said, make a career ombre and gradually transition out. And so that, it really just depends on you. And there are pros and cons to both, and there are methods to do both. What I was giving you guys in the presentation was more kind of the career ombre route, where you start planting the seeds now, and then you maybe talk with your manager and say, hey, can we carve out maybe 5 hours a week where I work with the IT department, and then maybe 5 hours turns into 10 hours. It depends on your boss. It depends on how open to that they are. And there are just all these other factors too. Again, finances, whether you're taking care of children. Some of these roles, not great for parents. Some of them are phenomenal for parents, and everything in between. So I know it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it really is going to be very case-by-case specific as far as what your needs are. But you can always work around the barriers. And I'm of the mentality that honesty is the best policy too. So I've always been super honest and open with my bosses, and I'll say, this is working, this isn't working. And in some cases, when I was not loving one of my roles, I got to take on more writing. And so if you reach out and you say these things, oftentimes you can start making that slow transition. If you want to make the full leap, I will say, as a newer grad, again, it depends on the role. Sometimes it's better to be newer. Sometimes it's not as helpful to be newer, but there might be certain roles like informatics where just a little additional certification, even if it's a super low level, cheapest one you can find, will help. Whereas the more prestigious institutions, you might end up looking at a larger, more significant investment. So,
and would you say, would you say that if someone was wanting to transition, that maybe, like how you mentioned PRN, that would be a good idea? Because these, like what you were saying, sometimes these non-clinical roles can seem luxurious and so much better than patient care. And then when we finally actually transition and get into it, it's not what we wanted. So to prevent that feeling of, oh no, what did I just do? Would you suggest like shadowing, trying to just communicate, asking these rehab liaisons, getting their story, sort of like a career interviewing?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. You're my savior. But basically, that's so true. One thing I always recommend is informational interviews, which is you call somebody up or you LinkedIn message them and you ask them for like 20 minutes of their time. You pick their brain a little bit about their job. I have to add the caveat, you should never be like, should I do this? Or what can I, it's never about you. It's always you interviewing them. So I would say, Emma, how did you launch Debt-Free PT? What made you realize you wanted to do this? What are some of the challenges of your role? What are some of the benefits? What are some of the pros and cons? What type of person would succeed as an entrepreneur? That kind of thing. So you can set those up. But I will say the Spotlight series on my site, I created it because once I started initially reaching out to people, I would, before I ever had the Spotlight series or anything else, I would connect people to the same non-clinical professionals as I would find them. And then these delightful people were starting to really spend a lot of their time on the phone with people doing these informational interviews. So please check out the Spotlight series. If you have additional questions, you can always ask them. I don't know if I have a networking group that Emma can link, but most of the people I spotlight are in this networking group. So what I'll do is I'll post the article there, and then I'll tag the person if they've agreed to be in the group, and then people can ask questions in the thread, and that way they're not getting inundated with these same informational interview questions. Now, it has resulted in some cases in someone saying, yeah, come on over and shadow. Again, it depends on how secretive your work is, I guess, how protected it is. I wouldn't see an informatics person necessarily always being able to let someone shadow, depending on the type of work. If it's really HIPAA intensive work, maybe not. If it's more just general communication, they might take on someone to shadow. Totally recommend shadowing. Another thing I recommend doing is if you take that career ombre approach, ask. Some hospital programs have things called over-the-fence programs or the equivalent. When I worked at Scripps Encinitas, they had an over-the-fence program where this was not available to PRNs, but it was available to full-timers. And you could ask the manager and say, I want to spend a day over in the safety department or in the informatics department. And then they would set you up so that you could spend a full day shadowing. And again, I wasn't able to take advantage of it because I was PRN at that point, but I always thought it was a really cool idea. So those are things to do. And then if you are looking for mentorship or you have additional questions and you're not sure quite yet if it's right for you, you can do one of two things. One is you can consult. So if you reach out to, say, a rehab tech company and you love what they're doing and you're in talks and you're networking and they're saying, oh, we're thinking about hiring a PT or an OT, then you can always ask to either volunteer or, give in return for some pay your time as a consultant at this company. And then that's a way to kind of try before you buy. And if you go and read that writing article that I'm going to send you, Emma, I talk about that with Creative Circle and Aquint. I had written through them as a contractor, and it's kind of interchangeable with consultant. It's slightly different, but as on a contract basis, it was very try before you buy. And I was writing for a number of health companies, and I knew that I didn't want to join one of them because even though it was cool and exciting, I could see the writing on the wall that the company was going to be out of business in a year. And so it's a really cool way if you decide to consult, or sometimes you can call yourself a contractor, to try before you buy. And then one other thing that Emma and I were chatting about this before the show, but I'm in the process of putting together a pilot program for a mentorship program on my website. And in that case, you'll be able to take, I don't mean to say the hottest people, but I would say the most popular people that I've spotlit tend to be people who are clinical trainers, clinical informatics specialists. Not so much the entrepreneurs, mainly because a lot of times entrepreneurs are very niche down, but the people who have these really exciting, interesting healthcare non-clinical roles, I'm talking with some of them, and they're going to be available for actual one-on-one mentorship, either programs or at least one-on-one calls. So we're implementing that at this point. So if you feel like, okay, this is all fine and good, but I don't want to ask questions in your group and I don't want to just read that thing. I want a one-on-one in-depth session. Then we are setting this program up, and it's a way for these people, their time is valuable, for them to get compensated, and for you to also just learn a lot about, do I really want to go this route? Let me spend the hour on the phone with someone who doesn't, ask them every burning question about salary, all those things that maybe they don't want to answer in a public forum.
Awesome.
So we have that going.
I know you've got so many amazing resources.
Thank you.
I want to end with, I know we could keep going and there's so much more, but I want to end with one final question.
Sure.
If someone really knew right now after graduating that they wanted to go into this non-clinical career path, what would be your number one tip right now for them to do? And I know that's tough.
I'm trying to decide because I have the number one and the number two tip.
Okay, number two, both tips. You can put both tips.
Okay. I mean, and then this is without saying, join all of my networking groups, obviously. That goes without saying. But I would say start networking before you do anything else. But the other tip would be to start taking on some extra roles at your work. Or if you're PRN, then use that outside time to start really investing in either volunteer organizations, Habitat for Humanity. You can take on a leadership role. You can join Toastmasters. I love Toastmasters, and they have all these different leadership roles you can take on. And so do those types of things. Start putting yourself out there so you have additional fodder for your resume. And for the networking part, again, I've heard statistics, and Donna, who I know you interviewed, Donna Lampke, she's mentioned the one that I've seen over and over, which is up to 85% of jobs are gotten through networking. And that's kind of a crazy statistic. And I get messages every day from people who say, I applied to a job in your job board and I got it. So there are tons of people applying to jobs and getting them that way. But networking is a great, great, great way to get started. So try to identify maybe what you want to do in the non-clinical world, and then just start putting yourself out there. And even if you're shy, there are ways to network. You can network in online communities. You can network in smaller groups. You can network in women-only groups if you prefer that. There's just such a world of opportunity these days because we're all so connected.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Meredith, for sharing everything. Just so many details. Once again, there's way more we can talk about. Meredith has an amazing course, which I'll link below, which is the Non-Clinical 101 course. And it dives into these concepts and so many more concepts. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to ask Meredith, and she's just an amazing resource. And, think about this as something like what Meredith said, not necessarily something that you may want to do now, but use this information in the back of your mind as you start your careers to sort of maybe position yourself to do what you really want to do and be successful in anything that you want to do. So thank you so much, Meredith. I appreciate it. And we'll see you all in the live panel where you can ask any questions you want to on August 17th, and check out all the other amazing talks on creating your resume, interviewing, negotiating, documentation, and so much more. Okay, guys, see you later.
Thank you.